Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the November Advisory Board meeting for the Housing Opportunity Fund. We will start this morning with public comment. Try to please keep comments to 3 minutes. Crystal Jennings.
Good morning. I know that we all were here for 3 hours last month trying to get things passed and talked through. So I appreciate those of you who stayed to the end, and I appreciate the ones that were able to stay until they had to leave. Over here on our side, the room was full, but there was only two or three of us standing at the end after 3 hours. But I appreciate you guys' hard work and dedication to this. So today, I just want to say that I hope that you guys are able to talk through what is on the agenda for today and get it passed, or just at least get a good sense of everyone's understanding with that. And yeah, thank you.
Hey, Crystal is the only one that signed the public comment sheet. Is there anyone else that would like to do public comment? Okay. Let's move forward with roll call. Richard Butler.
Present.
Mark Masterson.
Here.
Valerie McDonald Roberts, not here. Leslie Springs, not here. Lena Andrews.
Here.
Diamante Walker.
Here.
Carlos Torres, not here. Adrian Wanahall. Here. Joanna Dimming.
Present.
Jerome Jackson, not here. Majestic Lane, not here. Sonia Tillman.
Present.
Jamel Bay.
Present.
Kyle Chintalopoli.
Here.
Samuel Sue.
Here.
Teresa Kell Smith, not here. Derek Tillman.
Here.
All right, we do have a quorum. Thank you. We sent out the minutes from October 4th. Does anyone have any questions, changes, comments to the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion passed to approve the minutes. And I should also say, in addition to Richard being on the phone, Ann with Urban Ventures and the HRNA advisors team is also on the phone.
As is Philip.
As is Philip. And Jerome Jackson just walked in as well. Okay. So we'll move forward to talk about the Housing Stabilization Program, which is what we were calling homeless prevention before. So it's the same program, we just re-tagged it. And Ann, we have a microphone up to the speakerphone. So if you want to go ahead and sort of describe the program, I do want to remind everybody that we had a working group meeting a couple weeks ago. We had a little less than half of the advisory board members present at that meeting where we discussed the program components that you now see in the guidelines that are attached to your packet. The guidelines are just a little bit longer version of the program components that were emailed out, but it's all the same. It's just additional sentences to be in the URA format. So go ahead, Ann. Why don't you walk them through that?
Sure. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I've got a scratchy throat, so I hope you can hear me. And if you can't, Jessica, we're having trouble hearing. So this program attempts to provide housing stabilization resources to prevent households from becoming homeless. The goal is for folks not to be entering the homeless system. And so one of the things about the administration of this program is that it doesn't use the consolidated point of entry. It is prior to the existing homeless system. So this is an intervention to prevent homelessness. As such, it's designed to provide a short-term intervention, either a one-time or no more than 12 months of funding to individuals and households who are struggling with housing-related expenses. This is it is set up to be an RFP for nonprofits to apply for funding. So the applicant to the RFP will be a nonprofit program administrator. The recipient of this, in the end, will be an extremely low-income or very low-income household. As we envision it, the eligibility criteria will be for the households will be the same across each program administrator, but program administrators might in fact choose to restrict their funding to only certain components of the eligible uses. So program administrators will have some flexibility in designing a program which they believe best fits the need. And yeah, I think that's my summary. Jessica, are there pieces you want to add there?
Okay.
Oh, we should say a bit about the mortgage payment issue.
Yeah, just extremely quickly on the mortgage payment issue. So the program is set up to basically provide emergency assistance to keep people from becoming in default of their lease agreement. We had also talked about to keep people from defaulting on their mortgage or missing even one payment on their mortgage. Since the working group meeting, I've had conversations with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. They run, it's called the HEMAP program for foreclosure prevention, and it's been around for a lot of years. And they work with folks once they get the letter from the mortgage holder that they are in default and starting the foreclosure process. They work with folks generally through a loan mechanism to help them pay their mortgage payments to get them back on track. I do think there is a way for these programs to work together and in tandem, but PHFA would like to meet with us to discuss that, to figure out kind of the best points or the best ways for this program to work so as not to compete with theirs, but to be compatible with it, and to fill the gaps that aren't out there right now. So and they have offered to meet with the advisory board in the upcoming months. So what you're looking at today is a version that has it taken out with the acknowledgement that we will work with PHFA. So if we run this program in 2019, to put it back in, but did not want to have it in there and accidentally compete with such a good funding partner.
So as far as
One other.
I understand, their program is well funded. I mean, they don't run out of money in June.
Not that I am aware of. I've never heard them say that they ran out of money.
How many applications do they get from the city of Pittsburgh each year for their program?
I don't know the exact number, but I do know that people in the city use it a lot. I mean, we just having mortgages on properties throughout the city are alerted frequently that someone is going through the PHFA HEMAP program. So, I mean, I know it is a well-known source in the city. And as far as I understand it, everyone who actually, when the foreclosure process starts, there's a letter that is sent out to everybody. And at the bottom of the letter, it says, for assistance, please contact Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency's HEMAP program.
Would there be coordination with PHFA, for example, a program administrator? Someone comes to them and they say, we're not operating in this mechanism. However, here's a referral to PHFA. Would that kind of be set up?
Yes, I mean, that's the goal. That's why I think we need more time to kind of figure this out.
And have we thought about if they don't qualify for PHFA's program, will we then be able to support?
Possibly. That's the stuff we need to talk about. That's
Okay.
because to get to my understanding, my limited understanding of it is to get to PHFA's program, though, you do have to have missed enough payments that the legal process starts. And Adrian's nodding her head. You probably know more about this than I do, but so there very well could be a way for this program as it's described to to work in tandem with PHFA, but PHFA wants a chance to understand it as well. And it just seemed with the rush situation that we're in to get these programs out the door, that's why it was taken out. But if folks want to reconsider it, you know, we can, but the way it is presented today is that we will look at it for 2019.
Derek, to go back to your first question, it's what you're suggesting that either through the procurement or through ultimate coordination with the program administrators that we, in effect, ask or instruct them should someone come and have mortgage issues that they be referred to PHFA. Okay.
Exactly.
So that in the interim, before we understand how this works, we're at least ensuring that they're connected to the proper resources.
Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely,
Okay. Yeah.
absolutely.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, yeah, I didn't understand that. Thank you.
When people get an eviction notice, do they have a similar resource or referral? Nothing. That might be
Adrian,
another
can
issue,
you, like,
but it
say
would
that
be-
for the record?
It's not my understanding that when renters receive an eviction, they are directed toward a similar resource.
That would be cool. Not for 2018, and not maybe for this group, but
Well, in the eviction prevention work group
Yeah.
that exists in the city is working on items
Okay.
just like that.
okay, great.
There are other comments, questions about the remainder of the guidelines before we move to approve?
Jessica, I want to jump in with one more thing I'd like to point out to the group. When we discussed this a few weeks ago in the working group, we were going back and forth on the question of what is the appropriate standard for the residents, for the residents, the unit itself. And we had framed that around housing quality standards, which is the Section 8 standard, and there was a suggestion that we move instead to housing habitability standards, which is intentionally, explicitly a lower standard and a more flexible standard. And that is what is incorporated here.
Yes, that's correct.
I have a question. Do we have anywhere in the RFP that's going to say that the scoring is for guidance purposes only? Because there might be people that want to start new programs, and maybe it's not for 2018, but I don't want someone to read these guidelines and say, there's no way I'm going to get the money. You know, I don't even want to attempt this application. So it seems like we should have something even on the scoring criteria sheet that says this is for guidance only. You know, don't take this as hard and fast, how decisions will be made.
So you want a statement like that in the RFP? Okay. We can,
It
Oh.
appears that in all of the RFPs, there could be some language related to, this is a new process with room for adjustment, expansion, and discussion. So just alerting anyone who's applying for any of these components that we're not exactly using this language, but we're a bit of a work in progress. And we recognize that this first year may be fraught with some challenges, but the group has some flexibility in really thinking through, once we get the applications, how they can be evaluated and moved forward. I think that needs to really happen with all of the RFPs. If we're not using this as hard and fast criteria, people should understand that this is not hard and fast criteria.
Right.
okay, we will work on that language, and I'll let you see it before it goes out in the RFP.
I'm sure the URA just has language like that laying around for just such a purpose.
It seems like some language.
Their stuff usually is hard and fast.
It seems like some language that maybe gives people a comment section that if it's not meeting any of these criteria, make a case for some other criteria that
Yeah,
we
that's
could
a good
consider.
point.
And then that
That'd
we
be
will be able
nice.
to see some examples.
Okay.
So I have a few questions. I wasn't at the working group, so I'm not sure if you all have discussed this. But so it says all payments will be made. Well, program administrator will essentially make the payments first and then get reimbursed. I'm just curious, what was the thought process behind that, and will that end up being a barrier to being able to serve people because maybe the organization doesn't have the funds to front the cost, especially when they're serving a lot of people?
Yeah, I completely understand that concern. The problem is, at the URA, we can't give funds up front. We are a reimbursable agency, so we reimburse based on accrued expenses. So we need to see that invoice from the landlord. Now, if there's a need from the social service provider that they really, cannot front that, we may be able to work with them to be able to pay the landlord directly, but we can't give them the funding up front for them to then run the program, because we're the government and we have to document that those costs have occurred.
Well, and the other thing that I did discuss with Jessica, because that's certainly a concern for any organization, if you're going to ramp up quickly, then cash flow becomes an issue quickly,
Exactly.
regardless of the size of your organization.
Right.
But it appears that the URA's reimbursement process is a lot shorter than most other funders that we interact with, which makes it more manageable. Could you speak to that just a quickly?
Yes, yeah, we can probably, for this program, try to get the checks out within 2 weeks. And in our loan documents for our larger programs, we give ourselves 30 days, but we can generally operate around 2 weeks. For this, we will need to do, as identified in the guidelines, we will need to do inspections, but I've talked to our construction department. They know the time sensitivity of someone in these situations. So I am optimistic that we will get in, to do the inspection very quickly and to start the check cutting process immediately thereafter.
So just for clarity, so if they incur the cost, essentially have an invoice, you can, step in and pay that, if that presents itself.
We will work with folks if that is, needed. It's not the preference. The preference is to be able to fund the agency. We can't really fund individuals directly, so we need to somehow go through the agency. But if there is an issue, we can try to help them as much as possible.
Can the agency go to you for a line of credit to support that?
I don't know. That's a good question. We hadn't really thought about it. I'd have to talk to our Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and
Doesn't
into
The
that.
challenge with those type of things is manpower. The URA hasn't done lines of credit historically because it's so laborious. We don't have the manpower to, we can cut checks and give loans, but lines of credits are a little bit more difficult.
And I would just suggest, as much as I absolutely support small organizations and local entities, rental assistance is a complicated process in and of itself that needs a lot of fiscal infrastructure to manage. And that's important to make sure, this is a very public fund, and making sure that people can do the due diligence needed when you're working with landlords and the payments are complicated and you need to get all of this backup information. I think it is important that people understand that there needs to be a significant amount of infrastructure to manage a program of this type. And it may be something that people want to build capacity for. This might not be the year to just jump into rental assistance if you haven't done rental assistance before, because it seems on the surface like it's very easy, but it is incredibly laborious, much like the loan process.
Is it possible to get a commitment letter? That goes a long way for folks trying to get a line of credit.
Yes, I mean, once they apply, we review them, we bring them to the advisory board for a recommendation, they go to the URA board, we can definitely write them a commitment letter at that point.
That's what I was picturing. If they don't get a line of credit here, they'll probably go somewhere else with that commitment. I have a question about the AMI. So this is the only place, and maybe I'm just forgetting, but it says Pittsburgh AMI. And I'm looking in the minutes. I don't see Pittsburgh AMI. I just see AMI. So I'm maybe,
I mean,
I should understand this, but for this whole,
So
all the
it's-
guidelines, are they all built around Pittsburgh AMI?
Yeah,
or
it's the
county AMI?
Pittsburgh Metropolitan as defined by HUD. So HUD issues those every year.
Because
Pittsburgh
that's
Metro.
really,
It's Pittsburgh Metro, it's not Pittsburgh City. So it's the one
Okay.
that's issued and published by HUD, but it's defined by them as Pittsburgh.
Which resets in the fall.
I think it just did reset.
So I was gonna say, do we
Yeah.
have the most up-to-date figures on
Numbers.
exactly what?
I don't know.
yeah, I was
Does
just,
anyone know exactly when it reset?
I
Like,
think it's the federal fiscal year they reset it, so.
Okay.
that was around the
Yeah, so it should be just right about now that we should be getting
Okay.
For
that.
2019?
I mean, we'll base it on whatever that number is.
Just think because those numbers can be very different for the county, and I know that some people are using county numbers, especially with home ownership programs and things like that. So
Yeah,
I
we
think people
always
need to
use
be
the
really clear
Pittsburgh
on that.
Metro numbers.
Which is a 7-county region. It's not, yeah.
7 county, so it's not the local
It's
city of
not.
Pittsburgh numbers. Okay, so it is the higher numbers, not
Yes.
the lower. Okay.
Excuse me, just I have a question. Page 1, under number 3, eligible applications, it says the program administrator must have a 401c3. Is that correct, or is that a typo?
Sonia already corrected me. That's a 501c3. I apologize.
We might not get many applicants.
No, I mean, there is a such thing as that. It's a individual, like a LLC, so that's why I was asking that question.
501c3 is what I meant to write.
I don't want to belabor the point, but with the HEMAP, I just want to, had a question about what happens when it's a tax sale, like Jordan Tax is selling tax liens. I know the city doesn't run treasurer's sale on occupied properties ever, whether it's owner or but that doesn't mean that PWSA and other liens don't go to Jordan Tax and get taken that way through the sheriff's sale. I'm not sure if HEMAP covers that, and is that something if we had, we should have some flexibility if we wanted, if there's a need to do that.
Yeah, Adrian, do you know, I would assume that it would cover it because I would assume that the lien holder by law would have to issue that same letter that a mortgage holder. I mean, do you agree? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would assume that they do.
Well, and one
I
of
can
the other
double check.
pieces that was built in was the utility assistance component, which sometimes can be, even if the person's issue was mortgage, the utility assistant component could come from this program with the mortgage assistance from HEMAP as well. So thinking about the whole portfolio of what's going on with the household financially, you probably have an interplay of those things going on. Taxes have been something that's been interesting for all of the different funders that we've had, where it's not perceived as mortgage assistance, it's not perceived as leasing assistance, it's not perceived as a utility, it's a separate and distinct category. So rental assistance hasn't been able to touch taxes in a way that makes a lot of sense, which would be a good part of the conversation for 2019. Municipal bodies don't want to pay themselves back their taxes, but we know that that's a huge part of the equation as well. So these kind of assistance programs can get really deep and wide or be more narrowly focused.
Just as follow-up to the AMI conversation, the 2019 numbers don't appear to be out yet. The 2018 numbers were released at the end of March of this year, so yeah, if we follow the same pattern, yeah, it'll be the spring.
Also, it says household income and circumstances must be verified by the program administrator. Can we talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. We'll spell it out more in the contract with the program administrator, but they will need to verify the household's income by looking at IRS statements, pay stubs. We have a list of 5 or 6 things that we check on a regular basis to make that determination. And it's not always 100% clear when people are working overtime and so forth, but HUD provides guidance of how to, best calculate those things to the extent possible.
Okay, that's good. But circumstances, I think I was more or less focusing on.
Well, that's really more for the social service provider.
Sure.
I mean, that's their realm of expertise, and I think they understand when there are special circumstances happening in somebody's life. They still have to fit the income eligibility, but we'll depend on them and their expertise to understand when this program is necessary for somebody.
We just actually had a situation yesterday where someone who owns a helicopter had applied for rental assistance for a first month's rent security deposit, which is an interesting circumstance. I mean, and typically not one that we've experienced. So thinking about assets in a different kind of way.
circumstances.
Which actually could be technically used as a shelter because of the way that they're designed. So, I mean, it was an interesting conversation to talk about how does a helicopter play into a housing opportunity? Is that an asset that we should be talking about divesting of? How do you even calculate that as an asset? Not 100% sure.
What's the blue book about?
Yeah. I have so many questions.
He can be doing tours,
Yeah.
making money.
Is it the person's business?
Right, right.
I don't want you to divulge too much information.
I do need to remind everyone, we are being recorded
Yeah.
for the TV, so when you speak, we do need to speak into the microphones. Are there any other questions, or is someone ready to make a motion?
Yeah.
This is Richard on the phone. I have one question. Because the situation of finding homes for people who could potentially be homeless is usually an emergency situation, and we have to get URA board approval. So does that mean, regardless of what the situation, we have to wait 1 month before the board to meet to take care of these cases?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, so the way this is going to work is we'll get board approval to enter into the contracts with the administrators. So if we enter into a contract with Administrator X for $250,000, then they just will then run the program at that point, and we will not, need to go to the board for individual cases.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just have one more question and then a comment. So it says that under number 8, that they can terminate support when it's no longer needed or when a household is no longer meeting program participation requirements. So I guess the concern here on the flip side, what happens when they're not meeting requirements and they signed a year lease with the landlord and the program has committed to providing a year of support? Is the landlord then left holding the bag, or what happens in that case?
So I would put into the application process and ask to every organization about what a termination process looks like.
Sure.
In any of the rental assistance programs that are funded through the city, we don't guarantee anyone a certain amount of assistance. The contract agreements with landlords delineate very specifically what the program is, what the program can do, what the levels of support are, what participation looks like. So the city has already designed programs where we never make a guarantee of a year's worth of a lease with a landlord. That has to be a very specific conversation with landlords about what programs can do. This particular program isn't designed to do things like damages either. So in the application, it would be critical to ask organizations to answer those questions of what does a program termination look like? What does your process with a landlord look like? What guarantees are you making when you enter into a program? Because a lot of things could happen in a year.
Right.
And you want to make sure that you always have your contingencies for any one of those elements that would happen.
Sure.
And the ESG parameters are 3 months of assistance at a time. Even though someone could get a year or more, it's only sort of guaranteed in blocks of 3 months because there should be recertifications with folks to make sure that the situation is still the situation as you understand it. And if folks need more support, you can leverage that. If they need less support, you can leverage that. So those programs have been designed with that mindset of this isn't long-term assistance. So you shouldn't be talking about it as if it's a guarantee for any endless period of time with no parameters or conditions attached to that.
I guess I just think we need to give that some thought so that there's accountability on both sides.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, landlords it'll be a detractor because they're not getting into it to do a 3-month lease, to kind of saying, okay, I'll provide this shelter, but, you know what I mean? It needs
But this is also supposed to be short-term assistance, not long-term assistance.
Sure.
So it would be a different group of folks that would be targeted for the assistance. So I agree with you 100%. You don't want to make promises that you can't keep or put people into bad situations and then create enemies in the affordable rental market, which isn't adequate to begin with. But I do think it's important in the application to ask applicants, what does that really look like for you? What is the landlord relationship? What is the landlord communication? What are your guarantees? What are your eligibility parameters? What does participation mean?
Right. And then my last comment was, so it says that I guess the program will provide monitoring reports to the URA on a quarterly basis. I'm assuming we'll also have an opportunity to review those.
Yes, I mean, I need to look at that in a little more detail. I don't know if people need to see name for confidentiality purposes, names and things like that. But in terms of how many households have they helped, their income levels, you know, what the success rate has been, yes. I need someone to move.
I'll move. So moved.
Okay, Mark moved. Somebody over here seconded. Majestic seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion approved. And does anyone have any questions on the scoring, or should we move that at the same time? And recognizing Joanna's comment that it is used as a tool, not a final decision-making mission.
And adding something that they can talk about, make the case for why.
Section.
Yeah, a comment section.
All right, can I have a motion on that?
Motion.
Second.
Okay, Joanna, motion, Kyle, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving forward to the fifth and final program of the 2018 allocation plan. We do not have the components and the guidelines here today for you to review and for a motion. But we do want to have a bit of a general discussion with the advisory board, giving us staff some guidance as to how to. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Evan just reminded me, we also should approve the issuing an RFP to social service providers. Can I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Sonia, Mark, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the for sale development program. So what we want to do today is just have a general discussion and then have you help make some recommendations for us staff to move this forward over the next month. So basically, in accordance with the enabling legislation, we found out after the allocation, well, we delved into the legislation a little bit more after the allocation plan was approved and realized that the way the legislation is worded, we cannot use a grant for the development of for sale properties unless those properties have a permanent affordability, and the legislation defines a permanent affordability as 99 years or the life of the house, which that one's a little open to. I'm not sure what that means actually, but so that's what the legislation says. If the homes do not have permanent affordability, the legislation states that it needs to be in the form of a loan. So we just want to talk about that because we didn't talk about that when we came up with the allocation plan. There's $1.25 million in this line item. And so next slide. We have 3, maybe 4 suggestions of how to move this forward that we did talk about a little bit in the working group meeting that we had a couple weeks ago. The first one being that the HOF funds be used as an acquisition line of credit or loan to community development corporations to be able to give them easily accessible, like a loan commitment where they could draw down to acquire properties to rehab and resell, but to give them some access to funds to be able to do that relatively quickly as foreclosures and sheriff sales and abandoned property happen in their neighborhoods. The second option being to use the funds to bridge the gap between the total development cost and the sales price and record that 99 years. year restriction. So basically, we could use it as a grant the way it was discussed when we were moving towards the allocation plan. And just a very general example, if a house costs $175,000 to acquire it, rehab it, and it can be resold to an affordable 80% buyer at $125,000, then there's a $50,000 difference, and that could actually be granted to the CDC doing that work as long as that 99-year deed restriction is recorded, which what that means by a deed restriction is that a legal document will be recorded by the title company on the property, so when the owner goes to sell it in 20 years, the title company doing that transfer will see that on their notified URA, and the URA will say, well, they have to be selling it to another affordable buyer. So that's how that would work. The third option is we could use the funds to give a deferred mortgage to the future homeowners, or even to loan the funds to the CDC, and then the CDC and or the URA then takes that same funding and loans it to the future homeowner. There's pros and cons with that approach. The con really being that it depends on the market value of the house. So under my example, if the house costs $175,000 and we sell it for $120,000, it's sold for $125,000, so it can be an 80% AMI buyer. If it's in a high income neighborhood, then if the value might even be more than that, it might be $225,000, then recording that as a second mortgage to the owner is okay, because they're still within value. There is a concern that if in some neighborhoods, if the value of that house is just $125,000 or even lower, then that borrower might be taking on more debt than the actual value of the house, and that's the negative of that alternative. And then we didn't put it on the slide, but there also is, the potential alternative of just waiting on this program and discussing with city law and others about if there's any way to alter to modify the legislation or something like that. But that could be a very lengthy 9-12 month sort of process. So that's why that's not on the slide, but it could be an option if that's what the advisory board would like to do. So now I open it up for discussion.
Well, I think that, you guys are looking at this in a way that was never intended, having sat through all this stuff through the affordable housing, sat through city council. You've gotten a couple of memos from Bob Dame with outlining how you can use it this way. But I also understand that there's a reticence to do that, and a legal review that the URA and or the city, the purpose. I'm not a lawyer, but I can probably line up 5 or 6 lawyers that would say you can make grants to do this just like you do with your existing housing programs for these kinds of projects. That was clearly what the intent of one of the uses of these funds were supposed to be. You guys have kind of taken that and twisted it around and have found ways, I think, to create barriers to doing it. That's not something that the lawyers have said. It's something you guys have come up with. In the interest of trying to get funds out, I'm not sure what the choice is, because you're clearly not willing to do the grants as was in the legislation. If you look at, Section 7 of 2203A7, number 7 in there is clearly to stabilize mid and lower value markets, and you're doing that through grants. It's not restricted. It doesn't say anywhere in here that you can't do grants. So, I don't want to be here another 3 hours today. I think that all of those options are not great for doing stuff in neighborhoods where the value isn't there, where these are meant to build value and to stabilize markets and get rid of vacant houses and blight.
So could we move forward with this and then also look to have the legal department work on making that change for next year?
Where's the hang-up with, what is the actual language?
I'm looking for it right now. I should have started. 234.04. See, okay. For sale housing, okay, hold on, so it's C2. For sale housing, the fund assets shall be in the form of a secured loan that must be repaid upon conversion of the unit to a use other than owner-occupied housing or upon sale of the unit to a purchaser who is not low income.
And that was referring to the deferred mortgages that buyers get, similar to the programs that the ORA now operates. That's the way it works, and that's the way there was the discussion about this. But, if you look at section, 2307, number 7, stabilize mid and lower market neighborhood through activities such as making affordable loan products and grants available for the construction or rehab of owner-occupied homes. I don't know how much clearer you get when it says or grants. So you guys are interpreting it a way that it was never meant to be interpreted. And you don't have to go back and look at city council tapes or anything, because the purpose in the enabling legislation is to preserve affordable and accessible housing in the city of Pittsburgh, as more particularly specified in 232.03 and 232.04. And you look at those sections and it says grants. So I don't know how much clearer it needs
Mark,
to be.
04 is just what she just read. I mean, that's the issue, is that there is conflicting information.
Now, read
so-
number 7 in 04. Stabilize mid and lower market neighborhoods through activities such as making affordable loan products and grants available for the construction or rehab of owner-occupied homes. How much clearer does it need to be than that?
I don't see a 7.
There is no 7 in 04.
Number 7 under there.
Not in 04.
Not in 04.
There's 7 in 03.
03.
I'm sorry,
03.
I said 03. 202.03A7, you go A, and then it comes down to number 7,
Right,
which is to
right.
stabilize the mid and lower market neighborhoods. That's the places that aren't Lawrenceville and East Liberty where
Sure.
the market's taken off. It's places like a lot of the north side and a lot of neighborhoods in the city that look like they do still look the same as they do from 1990.
This is what, like, we've talked about legally. So the statement you're referring to, I just lost it that quickly, but it says loans number 7, stabilize mid and lower market neighborhoods through activities such as making affordable loan products and grants available for the construction or rehab of owner-occupied homes or financing and purchase of rehab of vacant structures by neighborhood-based nonprofits. But
Or
then
affordable
in
homes.
section 234.04, it goes on to talk about permanent affordability and emphasizing community land trusts and permanent affordability, and allows for grants for that. And then it goes on in the next section, the one I read earlier, section 3.C or D, to acknowledge that for houses that don't fit the above criteria, which is permanent affordability, it must be a loan. That's how it's outlined. So the legislation is allowing for both grants and loans, and it's using permanent affordability as the difference. That's the conversations we've had internally, with our legal department. So that's where we're at with this at the time being.
But isn't the question really just about, I don't think it's really for the homeowner going into the property. Clearly, they have to qualify. When we're really just talking about if they sell the house?
On resale. Right?
Upon resale. Mm-hmm.
So it's 80% AMI and below, and then upon resale, it would be to someone at 80% AMI.
But aren't they not going to be able to get a loan if the value is not in the house? And like to the 175 example, say the sales price was 125, and doesn't that only work if it appraises at 175 even with the URA loan, or can it appraise at 125 and that will still
That's
work?
if it functioned as a deferred mortgage, is outlined in option 3.
If it functioned as a deferred mortgage, my question is,
But if it
does it have
functioned
to
as
appraise at 175?
If it functioned as a grant, though, with the permanent affordability.
Well, I think we're all happy about the grant. I
Yeah.
think we're trying to figure out the loan, whether it works in low to moderate income neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's it.
And my question is, if it doesn't appraise at the 175, is that gap deferred loan possible? Does that bring that value down to 125?
I mean, I've seen banks, I've seen people take second mortgages that might exceed the appraised value, and as long as the bank's value is within it, I've seen those transactions happen. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, though, because that creates more debt for that individual than the value of the house.
Jessica, is bullet number 1, is that sort of an equivalent to the Carl program for CDCs? Is that the way that I can think about that?
Just for acquisition.
Yeah,
Just for
acquisition, not
acquisition,
the
yeah, okay.
Well, Carl's more for an individual. This is for organizations.
That's
that
why I
would
said,
do it.
would it be a comparable comparable tool to what Carl program does for an individual buyer? Is it giving CDCs the ability to do that same thing the way that you have the program structured?
It's giving CDCs the ability to acquire properties and then probably figure out then how to finance the rehab separately from that.
Okay.
The rehab's not included
But
in that.
It's just oftentimes we have to buy properties before we actually know how we're going to.
Right.
So this would allow them to interface with the property reserve process, pay that $200 or whatever it is to hold it, to wait for it to come clear title and all of that stuff.
Or if you can get a better quality property for $20,000, that doesn't need as much work.
It would also allow them to be able to buy from a willing seller who is ready to sell it to someone who will then charge market rent, and they could purchase it and rehab it for affordable home ownership. It just gives them a quicker funds that they could access.
Are we choosing one of the 3 bullets, or can we do hybrids of the bullets that we think address the issues that we want to address?
That's a good question. We could probably structure a tiered program if that's what others want to do, if they want to have a couple different components of the program.
And one other question, the PHOP program, I don't know if I have the right acronym that the URA used to have. The issue with bringing that back was we didn't have the resources in order to run that program. Do any of these bullet points address what that particular program used to do? Because that's the one I think that was working and folks wanted to see return, but the URA didn't have the means to do it.
So the PHOP program, the Pittsburgh Home Opportunity Program, was a program that the URA ran out of a single-family bond issuance, which basically enabled people when they purchased a home to go to a banking partner and get a low-interest mortgage rate. And it was coupled with down payment closing cost assistance. So the HOF down payment closing cost program fills that portion of the void, but the reason we haven't been able to bring PHOP back is because in 2008, when the rates declined, the banks were actually beating our rate and we were locked into a bond issuance. So the banks, I think, are still having pretty good mortgage rates that none of these programs are really set up to compete with them.
So we need to maintain permanent affordability. That's the objective here. That's what we need to do. And we've got to figure out, we have some people who feel like we can't do that in the form of a loan solely, that we need grants in order to make the product accessible. And the legislation says that we can use both if desired.
The legislation says we can use both loans and grants. Grants are tied to permanent affordability.
I guess I'm not understanding the issue then, because that makes sense to me, but I could have missed some things.
I guess the concern is for affordable home ownership that doesn't have permanent affordability, that they wouldn't be able to use grants.
So deed restriction for 99 years, we're not talking about a land trust. We're not talking about these properties going into some sort of trust, and that's what's holding that.
That'd be the most effective way, but that's not the only
way. It could.
way.
The legislation allows for that. It allows for land trust, and then it allows for other permanent affordability. So it could go in a land trust, or the URA could just put a deed restriction on it, where the URA is notified when it goes to resell.
And what is I'm trying to understand what the uncomfortability is with this.
I think it's the deed restrictions in markets that aren't.
Okay.
It's one thing to put a deed restriction where that's that in a place that affordability, it's not reachable in a place like Lawrenceville. I'll pick on Lawrenceville because that's the one I think everybody knows. But it's quite another thing to try to do that in neighborhoods that don't have that market value, that you're having difficulty attracting buyers in the first place that are coming into a neighborhood that might not be as stable, might not have as many amenities.
So you're
But
talking
just
about saturation of affordability and
No,
opportunity
it's
for
not even about,
neighborhoods?
it's not saturation, it's about the ability to sell the house at the end of the day.
It has to be a rationally economic choice for someone to purchase a house with a deed restriction. So it has to be affordable enough that they feel they can't find the same thing on the market without a deed restriction.
But if markets are going to shift, and we are trying to create affordable housing now,
Right.
and markets will shift, let's just take the Hill District, for example, that's what I'm representing here, and the market shifts, it allows, once that market is different, this home allows for folks who might not otherwise be able to get into that future market to still be able to come in.
And that's what we want, but
And
they
that's
have
what we
to, it has to be a rational choice. If there's a house without a 99-year restriction, they're going to pick it. So it has to be cheaper and better quality than that other
But we're always
alternative.
going to have families that fit this particular construct, because we're not eradicating poverty here. We're just creating more supply for people who are in that condition. So I personally, I'm not overly concerned about that, because I don't think the tools that we have are big enough to make a difference one way or the other. I think when we talk about families, it's just creating an opportunity for housing for a particular family.
Because there's not, well, the supply isn't there, like you're pointing out. So while we might have a lot of vacant and seemingly affordable housing, it's not in the quality that someone's going to want to purchase it. In our neighborhood, it's not. But
I challenge that. I don't think, I think that's,
You challenge.
anecdotally, I think that's correct, but I think when we get back to the lived experience on the ground, it's very easy for us to say, nobody's going to want that house. You don't know what people want, because
It's not about renting the house, it's about buying the house.
Yeah,
This is home ownership, and
Yeah.
there are choices that you make, and it's a matter of what the market in that neighborhood is doing and how quickly you think that that's going to turn. And, we've been, there's maybe 15 or 16 neighborhoods that have affordability issues in Pittsburgh right now. And there's the other 88 or the rest of the, what's 88 minus, the rest of the 60-some neighborhoods, that's not a real issue right now, that there is an existing stock, but you've also got in those neighborhoods tremendous areas of blight and abandonment. And when you're doing these things, it's difficult to attract buyers to those parts of those neighborhoods because it's risky. It's perceived as being a risky thing to do, that if that community group doesn't do the next 5 houses, and I'm stuck here on an island with 3 that were done.
That's real.
I'm just telling, like,
That's
my
real.
my experience of doing 100 houses over my career with this stuff is that's a real concern, and there are other choices for those buyers, low-income buyers, to make that won't be on that street.
And actually, to an extent, you're both right, because it has to make sense from an economic standpoint, but at the same time, we can't sit here and say folks may not want that, because we know that folks are buying them, but they have to be incentivized, because essentially if they're being the first in, then they're looking for a house that's adequately priced. So in
The
that
gap
case,
is the
we're
incentive. We're putting subsidy in.
there was an example that if the house is 175 and only appraises 125, then we're not. So that's pretty much a situation where we'll probably have to forgive it, because that's an additional incentive to make that work.
But some of these projects are catalytic projects that go in where the private market may not see the value of going in. And so CDCs basically say, you know what, we're not the market. We're going to go in and we're going to try to create some synergy here, but they don't have the tools and resources to be able to do that. And so I'm just trying to figure out, and I understand, I'm cognizant of your experience. You've done this 100 times. But I think we just have to be careful about the anecdotes when we are trying to solve a problem that people spend 18 and 20 months saying this is an issue that has to be addressed.
Right, and I'm not discounting that, but what's likely to happen with these is it's going to be 2 things that are happening with that project and that buyer. Is that there's a gap between what the appraised value is here and what the cost is, and that's why these markets are kind of underwater. And then you get, so if it's $200,000 to do the house and you can only sell it for $150 because that's what it'll appraise for, you've got a gap that isn't going to get funded by anything that has to get repaid there at $50,000. And then you might need to take it from that appraised price down to 100,000 to make it affordable for that buyer. That's where a deferred mortgage comes in. And the URA operates those programs just like that right now.
Right.
This was supposed to mimic that. And the issue with 99-year, again, that's sort of a place-based, if that might be a great deal in a place like Lawrenceville, because you're going to have folks that aren't going to be able to be in that neighborhood any other way. But when you're talking about places like Charles Street, Marshall Shadeland on the north side, or parts of the West End, parts of the South Hills, where people have a lot of different choices, they're not going to maybe pick those. It just becomes a more difficult thing to sell in an already tough market to work in.
I think it is a really important tool for the markets that aren't hot, because we got to lay that groundwork while it's somewhat affordable to do these projects.
Right.
I think I think the grants will help. The key is making them affordable enough that it's an incentive, that they can't get the alternative.
Yeah,
right?
on,
Just that
on
it's
the
appealing,
affordability
making it
restriction,
appealing.
though, Mark, if we're arguing against it, then it's saying that, well, we aren't going to be successful in turning that market. If you are successful in turning that market, then there should be, an affordability risk. Because you could argue in East Liberty, in the War Streets, in those other neighborhoods, had we had the foresight and understanding that this is where Pittsburgh would be 20 years from now, then it would be.
You wouldn't have sold the units. You would have had great difficulty. There would have been a lot of defaults because folks wouldn't have purchased those units.
If it was affordable enough, they would have, like, the dollar houses.
Yeah, I
in
guess
Buena
if you're
Vista
giving
Street.
it away.
Yeah, just on the flip side, I lived in a project like this. I lived in Friendship on Clarendon Place that the URA invested in before Friendship. I mean, we probably would have said the same thing about Friendship that we're saying now about these neighborhoods. And the URA subsidized it. It's a great project. It's row houses. And I think they were like $90,000. They were affordable, and there was subsidy, and there was restriction that you had to stay for a certain number of years, but it wasn't a long-term affordability restriction. I think they sold really fast, but people who bought them, people were like, you're nuts. And then I was in the second wave of buyers, and they really went up. And I just thought, like, okay, all this subsidy went into this project, and there's no restriction on it. And now a lot of them are rentals because Friendship has totally taken off. People bought them. I mean, I love the URA.
And they're selling for like $250.
They're selling for like $250 to $300. They started at $90. They're not long-term affordable. They're mainly higher-end rentals. And like for the first wave of buyers, this was really good, but if they had an affordability restriction, Friendship has almost no affordable housing now. So I think that's the other side of it, and we just have to think about that too.
And I want to.
Can I just throw one thing out? So this balance between attracting folks into neighborhoods to revitalize them and preserving long-term affordability is a real tension. We run into it all the time. One way that we've seen it, I've seen it balanced, certainly not perfectly, is to have the long-term affordability restriction on the property, even in tougher neighborhoods, but to also include down payment assistance, somewhat larger down payment assistance, that is, so that some of the risk of things don't go as well isn't on the owner who's taking the risk to go in a neighborhood that's not there. So putting in $20,000 or $30,000 in down payment assistance, that so if things don't go up, they're not taking that downside risk quite the same way because they're not getting the same upside potential. And I think that's a pretty, that's an approach that's worked reasonably well and is pretty logical in that you're not getting the same upside potential, so you shouldn't have to take the same downside risk. I don't know that fits exactly where we're at, but it is an approach we've seen in other places.
And our deferred mortgages work a little bit like that, and I want to talk about that real quick in response to Mark's example of if it's $200,000 to total development cost to rehab the house, and it sells for, and the sales price to appraised value in the neighborhood is $150. This is an 80% AMI program, so for the buyer, they would really need about $125. So what we could do is that $50,000 to get from $200 to $150. If the CDC takes a grant through this program, it would have the 99-year restriction, or they could get a grant from someplace else to bridge that. And then the $150 to the $125, that could be in the form of a deferred mortgage, which fits number 3 on that list, to the buyer, because that would be a loan. But to answer Philip's point, it's a loan, but there is terminology in there that if the values in the neighborhood, do not increase and they cannot get that full price back, then the URA will share in that hit if that sales price cannot be resold as much. So that kind of almost addresses Philip's concern. So that's really kind of doing 2 prongs to the program, where we do the grants with the 99 years and then we do the loans to get it down to an affordable 80% AMI price. That could be a way to tie the 2 together.
Have we thought about keeping a restriction on for just a certain period of time, not 99 years? Because when I think about where this was done before, Homewood, the Hill District, Braddock, where they had the first homes built, they had, people went in early and took that risk. None of them had 99-year deed restrictions. I think the max was 15 years. And then after the 15 years, I think it even reduced per year. Have we just thought about something like that? Because I understand, everybody agrees we need to do it, but it's like, okay, maintaining long-term affordability, but also the other piece of it is the number one way to build wealth is through home ownership. And if we're not allowing that homeowner to access that equity, which essentially is their wealth, we're helping on one end, but we're also restricting them on the other end. And we're restricting the neighborhood from moving forward, because now that buyer is like, well, if I sell her, I guess I can't sell because, so, and then maybe there's another person who wants to come in that could help, advance the neighborhood, and it may just send a shockwave throughout the community. So I understand, but at the same time, we could be pigeonholing a community with this. So I think we just need to think a little bit more creatively. But again, in all the other examples, where this is already done, none of them have 99-year restrictions. So it's kind of like, why are we doing it now?
If it is done with a land trust, they've had much lower levels of foreclosure, and they have high rates of people moving into that being their first house, and they move into a house where they can get full equity, and they still get some equity enough to put a down payment on their next house. Ideally, there's a land trust because there's stewardship assistance. They kind of step in, like if you miss your monthly lease fee, they'll know maybe you're struggling with your mortgage, or they can offer employment assistance and things like that. But the idea is not to eliminate equity, but to limit it and pass some of it on to the future and keep it in the community.
And it's like a homeownership incubator. I mean, when you are going for one of these homes that has this level of subsidy in it, it's because you can't otherwise get into the market. And so how do you pay that forward? You can't extract all of that subsidy as equity. Some of that has to be maintained so that the next person coming to the table with similar situations can do the same thing, because you can sell that house and pay off another entire house. So I don't think it's an equity issue from where I sit. I think it's an access issue. We're lowering the barriers to entry, and then once people have that footing and they become good stewards and they're homeowners, they're in a different position for the next house.
But I think we're doing both. I think we're doing access. I think we also need to be cognizant of helping preserve their equity, but we're also doing something much bigger that we may not even be realizing, is that we're helping to advance a community forward. So we're actually helping that middle income neighborhood or that transitional neighborhood to actually, advance forward. So we're also catalyzing development. We can't forget about that.
No, that's true. That's true.
It's not just about this individual person. We're trying to make this spill over, that maybe the next few blocks doesn't need us the way that we were needed on the front end. So we have to be aware of kind of doing everything without hurting another thing.
But the market doesn't care about 80%. I mean, the market doesn't care about 80% AMI or below. The market cares about 81% AMI and above, because they have means. So what we're doing is we're saying if the market could just come in, there would be a deluge. There would be no need for us if the market cared about that bracket. It doesn't. So how do you create tools that says we care about this bracket, not just in 2018, we've got to think about 2038. And I think the way that this is designed, with the hybrid structure that you talked about, Jessica, gets us to win-wins in each of those areas. But I agree. I mean, we've got to think about long-term the long-term development needs of the neighborhood, but the market will do that because the market is good at that. How do you keep people that otherwise would not be able to get in to ensure they have access?
The interesting thing about the community land trust movement is the roots actually come out of the civil rights movement in terms of community control and defining the future of a community. And when we talk about a community taking off, we talk about the future of that community. If it's a future where those low income, moderate income people don't have a place, then it's not the future that we want to build as a city. So we have to, what we do when we rehab a house and we provide that opportunity for that low to moderate income buyer, will likely draw more private investment. But because we put a system in place for that mixed income future, then we're guaranteeing the future that we want to build.
So my thought process about community land trust is that it's less about restricting an individual and more about controlling the global environment of the community. So influencing what happens on a larger development perspective, controlling the land so that there is affordability preserved, so that there is affordable housing, kind of incorporated into the plan. Not as much so about, we helped you get in this house and we're going to, kind of pigeonholed you, because at least from my perspective, when I leave being a tenant to a homeowner, I want independence. I'm kind of buying into independence as well. So it's like I don't have to answer to my landlord about can I have a dog or can I paint, because I'm also going into independence. So the only thought about this is if we go this route, we're also restricting that person's independence. The land trust more should be concerned about what happens from a neighborhood perspective as opposed to just this individual. That's just my thought.
I think it sounds un-American, right? To not let someone make as much money as they can and pull their bootstraps, right? But we're trying to balance the personal rights with the community.
We're the whole program is designed to ensure that people in this income get in there. So we're doing that on the front end. So it's not like we're ignoring it and it's for anybody. We're already saying that this is for folks in this income bracket. So we're already doing that.
But you're only helping that individual. They're going to say those people, they build wealth, that's wonderful, but it didn't guarantee a future for the community where people like them could have opportunities.
And they're going to build some wealth. I mean, they're not going to come out and break even on the house that they buy. They're going to come out ahead. We just can't completely subsidize their acclimation without creating opportunity for future folks. So, so I don't think we did this in the Hill District. I mean, folks sell those houses for well above what was paid, and they can pay their subsidy back, and, there's no issue. And they go on to move to better and brighter neighborhoods because the rest of the Hill District is not happening.
Well, in the Hill District, there's only 50, I agree, because we don't want folks essentially flipping, on the government's dime. But that's why it's 15 years. We're not saying year one or year two. There should be a restriction to it, but maybe not 99 years. So it's like if you stay in there 15 years, you should be able to sell to who you want to, and you know what I mean. So, and again, the other thing is it's not like we're going to stop helping other people. So it's not over. You know what I mean? Like we're still helping other individuals outside of that one person. We help them. Now we move on to the next one. We help, continue it going on.
Jessica, what's the basis for the 99 years?
It's in the legislation.
It's in the legislation.
That half of the funds should be ultimately going towards.
50% of the funds need to go to create permanent affordability that's defined as 99 years.
But this is a different section, Mark. This is section 4 that talks about for sale, if it's permanent affordability, which is defined in the beginning section as 99 years, that it can be used as a grant, but if it's not, it needs to be used as a loan. It's section 234.04. If you start with let's see.
But still, half of those funds, ultimately the big pot, have to go towards the permanent affordability, so this helps us meet our requirement.
We have 5 years to get to that.
Yeah.
Just recognizing that there isn't, like land trusts and others, there isn't the infrastructure in place necessarily
Right.
yet.
The intriguing
And you don't need a land trust.
thing about this that we heard over the phone, I think, was that it's not the typical URA deferred loan, that it might be more something along down payment or closing cost assistance that's pretty heavy. And that's the counterbalance to the 99, that
Provides
might
incentive.
provide the market incentive. My concern is that you don't want to build a lot of these things that don't sell. And I'm not sure, I know that there's a lot of folks that sitting around the table that think that they will, but I worry about that. So maybe that's a way to experiment this first year, is to do deeper down payment assistance, that there's not a deferred loan on it, that it's a down payment assistance program that helps that buyer, and then they just got the bank mortgage and a 99-year deed restriction.
We want to talk, I mean, the purpose of us having this generative discussion is to hopefully get to sort of meets and bounds to then next month have guidelines presented to us, right? So
Can we do this in committee? Because we don't need a vote today, right?
no.
We can't, the reason with down payment assistance, I paused there for a second, is we're looking at a different issue at the URA right now regarding down payment assistance. And when it's, if it's at all a grant to a homeowner, it will trigger tax, a 1099-G form, unless it's underneath a threshold each year. We're looking at that right now, but that was my immediate thought to your answer was, oh, whoa, that person would get a humongous
$20,000
tax.
more income.
Yeah, for a tax
Or,
year.
under 10, I think.
Maybe that's, it gets staged over, those are things
I mean,
to
we can talk about, we can definitely talk about it, but yeah.
It's important.
So in terms of moving forward, I mean, do people want to get together then in another week or two and talk about Mark's idea and others to try to move us forward?
I'd be willing to do it, but I'm not sure anybody else.
Well, I think
That's an interesting idea.
I think
I'll volunteer to argue with Mark.
well, though, doesn't it ultimately come down to
That's fine.
what your board is going to listen to? And if your legal department is adamant that we can't go forward with a grant, then
Well, I think that,
what do we
I think the
talk
discussion
about?
today was it's a grant. I mean, the discussion we have with the legal department, you can do a grant, but there has to be the deed restriction, and their
If
reading
it's,
of it.
and then what do you do to make the 99-year, how does that go?
Yeah, it's a question then of incentive to, I think, the increased down payment assistance, which we need tax guidance on.
Yeah, I mean, if people want to write this down and go back and look at it, 234.04, priorities and restrictions. And then it says under C on page 6, it talks about the language Mark mentioned where there's a target of 50% being permanently affordable. That's in C. And then if you move down to D, the issue then is that it says all other housing that is produced or preserved through an investment of fund assets. And then it goes on to number 2 of that under all other to say that then for sale needs to be a loan. So that's where it differentiates the affordable, the 99 years from the rest of it. So that's where we're stuck. So everyone can look at that, and I'll be setting up a subcommittee to discuss this some more. I guess, is it okay though, like once the subcommittee meets, that I then email with the committee so that we can start to move forward prior to the next meeting? Are people okay with either coming to the meeting or kind of accepting the recommendation of that meeting moving forward?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Just for the public's benefit, though, we'll still review and present the guidelines at the December meeting.
Yes, we will.
And I can accept the recommendations from the committee.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. So just want to briefly give you an update as to everything else that's been going on. Just as a refresher, last month, this advisory board did approve the guidelines for the rental gap program, and they did go to the URA board the following week, and they were approved. Folks have been hard at work. Evan and Jamie over there working on a RFP, which we are extremely hopeful will be released early next week. So that RFP is for the $3.875 million rental line item, and it will be released publicly, hopefully, next week. Additionally, the down payment and closing cost assistance program was also approved by this committee and the URA board. We have a draft application that we are reviewing with our legal department. Right now, we are trying to figure out a few things, such as tax consequences to folks, and we're looking into that. But if we can get these issues resolved and over the next couple weeks, I am hopeful to have an application out on the street, ideally by our next advisory board meeting, and we can be taking applications and be up and running on that program. And then the third one that was approved last month was the homeowner assistance program, and that was approved by this committee and also by the URA board. And once the rental RFP is released, we will go full force ahead on this RFP, which is for program administrators. And so that RFP hopefully will be out within the next three or 4 weeks as well. So that is where we are at with the other programs. Are there any questions?
What are you doing to promote it?
Right.
Press con, what's going to happen with
Right.
that?
Right. That's a really great question. We will do as much, outreach as possible. We can have a press conference. We can, we definitely, the URA does a big Twitter feed blast, but in terms of, we're very concerned about attracting folks that are not necessarily internet savvy. So we're actually, we've had a couple meetings about advertising on the back or on the inside of buses. We're meeting about also the bus shelters in downtown especially too. And we have a community outreach person coming on November 13th who will meet specifically with as many community meetings as absolutely possible, and school and church and other ways to get into the neighborhoods. We've also started meeting with council people and their staff to make sure that when we do advertise in their neighborhoods on bus shelters or in libraries or whatever, we're hitting the places that they recommend, where their constituents go the most. And we're welcome to do anything else that others want us to do. I mean, we do have, in our budget, like I said, that staff position, we have some funds for marketing. It's very, very important to get these out as much as possible.
This is Richard. I would recommend that you also make sure that the information is in all of the Carnegie libraries.
Okay.
Are we talking about advertising the RFPs or advertising that services are available? Because I feel like those are two different things, and two different audiences, and also whether there'll be like a global phone number, whether we'll work through 311, that kind of thing. But with the RFPs, I mean, if we don't get them out for 3 or 4 weeks and we have our December meeting, I mean, we're not gonna make decisions before the end of the year. I mean,
Well, so there's the rental RFPs going out first, like I said, next week, Monday, Tuesday is the goal on that one. So that if there are projects that need to close, rental projects that need to close this calendar year, December 31st, that they could come to this advisory board at the December meeting. That's the intent. There's been a lot of legality and legal stuff that needs to go in the RFPs and so forth, which has delayed us a little bit. But if we, we'll try to get the next RFP for the program service providers out, or the program administrators out as quickly as possible after that. So that if there might be a chance to get some responses by the next advisory board, but if not, that would be a January.
If we get our, if we don't make our commitments by December 31st, can we still continue to make commitments for 2018 funds?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I was thinking more about the down payment and closing cost assistance program. That's going to be like a direct consumer thing.
Yes.
That might be a good thing for the mayor to do a press conference on to draw attention to the Housing Opportunity Fund and what it's funding. At least it seems like it would be low-hanging fruit to do something like that.
Yes.
Jessica and I were just having a sidebar. We'll discuss with the mayor's communication team and see what makes sense. Yeah.
At least on that one where you're not doing RFPs and there's not a process to get folks into the program.
Yeah, we should be able to close the first ones of those on or around December 1st and definitely have, quite a few of them closed by the end of the calendar year.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
So people will be
Mayor's
buying
got
new
the-
homes
Mayor's
for
got
the
the beard
holidays.
for it now.
Any other questions? I do want to make sure I announce that the next meeting, which is the first Thursday of December, they need to use council chambers for budget hearings. So that will be the 13th floor of 200 Ross Street at the URA.
One final question, or one question about the working group that we're going to have. Could we have Bob Damewood there to present a little bit of some
Sure.
memos that he's written about this too, and make a presentation?
Sure.
You wanted to do that, Bob?
After he already committed.
So this is more logistic, but if at the December meeting, we might actually be reviewing the rental gap responses, and a lot of us need to recuse ourselves, does that mean we don't attend the meeting? Because I know we
No.
can't be part of the discussion.
No. Philip, can you recap for everybody the conflict of interest policy?
Sure. So the conflict of interest policy, there's I guess the direct and indirect. So if you are actually, for the actual proposals that go in, if you made a proposal in there, then you need to you cannot be part of the conversation for anything in that program. So at this point, you should know whether or not you're going to have to, or shortly in the near future, you should know whether or not you're going to have to step out of that part of the conversation. It does not mean you can't be at the meeting overall, but you cannot participate in that part of the discussion. Does that answer the question? Or I'm happy to talk about it more.
So basically, you have to step out of the room if it's your own project?
So we went back and forth on whether you have to step out of the room. So it's not just your project, but when they're discussing all the awards for that program. So you can't be part of the discussion for another project that's going after the same funding, because obviously you have a conflict there too. So for the gap financing, if you went after gap financing, you can't be part of the discussion for any of the gap financing awards. Now, we had a different conversation about whether you have to step out of the room or not step out of the room. Since these are public meetings, it seems excessive to make you step out of the room since the public can be there anyway, but it does seem appropriate for you to step away from the table. But we didn't really decide. I think the group, advisory board probably needs to think about whether it's leave the room or leave the table for that part of the discussion.
I think there's a perception, though, that there is a gain to be made if you are part of the discussion or within the room. And I think that the optics have to be considered. I understand that, should they step out of the room, and it may sound silly, but from a perception of the general public and what they see, if they see that an entity is there garnering an advantage for whatever reason, I think that, again, then we'd have to open up to all entities that would be proposing, that would be responding to an RFP. And they can all attend
you
the
can't
public
just have
meeting
one.
directly?
You just can't have one.
Once you recuse yourself, you become a part of the general public. So you would still have the right to be here to hear an open proceeding. We can't strip your right to hear deliberations, just the perception of you participating in them. Or am I incorrect?
That's what Philip is saying, yes.
Well, and I just have.
I can see good arguments for both. I just think it's an issue you guys should discuss.
I have a unique question because I no longer work at CHS. My last day was yesterday. I know that they will be putting in an application, but I don't work there anymore. So I don't know how you want me to change my conflict of interest form based on that piece of information.
You might need to amend your conflict of interest form, yes.
Okay.
So will the applications go out, the proposals, will we be circulating them? Do you not circulate them to certain people, ahead of time before the meeting? So say we receive 5 proposals, okay, we're sending it to everyone, but, the applicants.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah, I guess if you work for an organization that plans to submit to the 2018 rental gap RFP, you'll need to tell me, and I won't include you on those responses when I email them out. And the same with the other RFPs as soon as they're issued.
So everyone who applies could theoretically come and watch deliberations of their application. I know. I was wondering.
Well, I was worried about that actually.
You need a quorum to.
Looking around the room, I think we'll have a quorum for most programs, I hope.
Make a suggestion, though, is that if there is discussion on the, that would impact the RFP and possible prospective submitters, I would suggest that in lieu of just a general public announcement of the meeting, that there be verbiage regarding what is being discussed.
Okay. Okay, I do put the agenda out, so we'll probably list the developer and project for the program, for the applications that will be discussed. Okay.
Are we gonna have enough time at one of these meetings to review and make decisions about proposals? It seems like a huge task.
I will get it out to you ahead of time. I definitely encourage folks to review ahead of time.
Well, I mean, you and Evan and Jamie presumably will have sort of underwritten them.
We'll underwrite them.
So we're not
right.
kind of
and that's
looking
sort of
at
the point of the
whole
scoring sheet,
yeah.
as well as just for us to say yes, we underwrit them, and this is what we're seeing, and we can also provide some underwriting narrative of here's a brief sources and uses, and try to summarize it for you so that the advisory board is not looking through a 30-page application.
I actually thought your question was getting more towards, can we do that and have a business meeting, right? That might be a problem.
It seems like another meeting where we review proposals and we come to this meeting and we make decisions or something.
I mean, next month we might have to do both. We might have to do the for sale strategy and any responses to the rental RFP. But ideally, we get in this cycle throughout the year where we do, a couple months of allocation plan and guidelines for, each year. But then the rest of the time is getting the applications in. So.
And hopefully you're sending it out in advance so we have time to review.
Yes.
That, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any other business for the November advisory board meeting? If not, wait, Crystal. Yes. Does anybody have public comment at the end of the meeting?
Thank you for remembering, Jessica.
You're welcome.
So, and what I wanted to say earlier from my public comment, I totally forgot, but you mentioned it and it re-triggered my memory. So I asked of the advisory board and Jessica, I know that your working group is typically, you don't want to go through the whole public process, but I'm asking to be transparent and at least let us know, because definitely between the 18th and 19th person of the advisory board, and that's Celeste and myself, little did I know, we would love to at least sit in, see what's going on, because like I said before, we feel as we are definitely a part of the advisory board, and we would like to be a part of your working group as well.
Can I talk about this real quick? Because so under the Sunshine Law, anytime more than 51% of the advisory board members, so 9, get together, I need to publicly post it. So that's why we go with committees where we have had like 7 or 8 folks, and it's really, according to Sunshine Law, I have to public post in the legal journal section, but most people don't read the legal journal section. So are people comfortable with me using Pittsburgh United to get word out for subcommittee meetings? Is that, and if we do feel, but I do need folks to RSVP to me, because if we do feel like there's going to be more than 9 members, I still do have to publicly post under the Sunshine Act.
It's where I feel like it gets awkward because it's like, oh, people didn't RSVP, so we don't have to go public with it. Like, that's awkward. Like, I feel like we should either plan for it to be an open meeting or not. And because it's almost a disincentive if people want to act privately to be like, I hope no one can come, so we can just be, I don't know. Like, it just seems weird. Like, you should have an intention or not.
Are executive sessions subject to, okay.
But I think it's real that nobody reads that section in the newspaper, right? So the fact that you have to post it is not really all that transparent. So I think we should assume that there's going to be more than 9 and post it anyway.
Okay.
But that's a separate question as to whether we want to do other means of outreach, either through Pittsburgh United or Pittsburgh United and.
Okay.
I would say
think
and,
we should-
because don't underestimate what people read and don't read. As far as public announcements, as far as, believe me, they do read. They read and they know, and the silence is not indicative of they don't know. Silence may be because you're following the law, but if you don't, to the degree that we have to, that's when there will be no more silence.
We're not saying
You don't
not
want
to
that.
do that, not
You
to
don't
do
want
the regular
Yeah.
way, but
Better
also
to
Pittsburgh
err
United.
on the side of
and if there's-
caution and be more transparent than less.
Like you could probably send to PCRG too, and I don't, there
Well, I
might
think
probably
that's the
others.
question.
More is
I mean,
better.
What makes it actually public information is not necessarily that it's in the Post-Gazette.
Right.
How do we really think about public information and getting to places where people really are and can get information? That is a whole other discussion, and I think Pittsburgh United is definitely part of that discussion, but I think that there are other entities that also could really
I was going to say,
a
take the
long way.
minimum and enhance it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so
outreach
I'm
person.
hearing all working groups, go ahead and post your regardless of an RSVP from members. And then we'll get the word out via other means such as Pittsburgh United and the URA's website and any other means.
PCRG and whatever.
Okay.
Well, also being really timely if for some reason a meeting is not going to be taking place or there's a change as well. Because I think sometimes we're good at saying this is a thing, but then not circling back and saying there's changes to the thing that we originally talked to you about. Because I know we've had a couple of changes of rooms and who was available and times that we were meeting. So if we are going to do a broader blanket, we want to make sure that all of the entities involved have the information. on changes.
Yep.
That would be disaster. That is just so disrespectful.
Right.
Particularly for actually this meeting next month, right? Yeah.
Yes.
What about with the RFP? Is it going to be an online or a physical? Are we going to have CD-ROMs or USBs or what are
Evan, can
10
you explain that a
copies?
little bit?
Do we know?
Yeah, so RFPs are all posted on the URA's website. RFPs are all posted on the URA's website as well as public purchase, which is what URA is now using for bid solicitation. We will there's PDF copies that are attached on the URA's website, so someone could download it and print it. And we'll also have we're calling it, I can't remember the exact term, but like a pre-proposal meeting, sort of where people who see the RFP and are interested in finding more out about it will come, and we'll probably have printed versions there.
I'm asking about what the applicant needs to do.
So how many copies of their
whether they
proposal?
can submit online
Oh.
or whether they
Well,
have to print it.
so
or-
typically at the URA we would be using what's called public purchase, but because of the rolling nature of this RFP, we're gonna collect them through the hof@ura.org email, so that it's just gonna be an emailed PDF. That's,
You email your proposal.
Yeah, sorry about the misunderstanding. Yeah.
No, that's all right. So we don't have any online system at this point for URA proposals.
Well, we do have public purchase, but the thing is with rolling RFPs, the way that public purchase works is that all the bids have to be unsealed at once. But with rolling RFPs, people will be coming in at different timelines, so we don't really have that luxury of waiting till a certain date.
What I would recommend is that they be posted to public purchase, but you don't collect them through public purchase, because they can be up there for however long you want it to be. And then, since you're using hof@ura.org, people just send them via email. I mean, that's what I would recommend, because I don't think the issue is really collecting them electronically. If they send them via email, that's the easiest way to share it.
I'm not sure the public purchase, this
It's
is
like
internal.
Beacon, like what the city has for Beacon.
I don't know Beacon either. But I'm just, I think we might want to move towards an online system that you fill in a form online, upload your attachments. It's just a nice modern way to do.
Okay, yeah, noted.
Everyone's doing that, most of the foundation.
And that's what public purchase does. It would just require you every quarter to set the end date on a quarterly basis or whatever, whenever you're gonna, and just refresh it every time you wanna collect
Yeah, you
applications.
can't pull it out,
Yeah, I mean, that's
you
what
can't
I
pull
would
from
do.
the
I
back
would do
end,
30-day
like this week
periods.
and see who entered through that. I don't know.
You're not really able to, because it's mostly used by I I don't know, like
Government
construction
contracting,
types
yeah.
of firms that are much more like, I don't know, they don't have rolling RFPs. It's typically like a bid date, and then they unseal all the bids at once.
You could create a Google form. I mean, it's not that
It's proprietary the other thing is proprietary information. I think if you're putting
I hear you.
financials and stuff
Yeah.
in your RFPs, you may not want them on Google.
Crystal, anything else or anything else from the public?
Anybody? So that was a yes?
Yes.
Okay. I'm on the center like, wait, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
All right.